Many men believe that explaining themselves in detail will build trust, attraction, and respect. The logic seems straightforward. If you justify your choices, clarify your intentions, and lay out your reasoning, others will understand you better and respond positively. But the reality is almost the opposite. Explaining yourself constantly often signals insecurity, emotional dependence, and a lack of internal authority. Women, and people in general, are attracted to men who operate from composure, decisiveness, and clarity, not those who seek approval through over-justification. If you want to understand the psychology of attraction and influence in a practical, real-world way, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. The principles in this video are not about tricks or manipulation. They're about, cultivating presence, personal authority, and lasting attraction. You lose respect when your words try to compensate for internal uncertainty. The first principle to understand is that over-explaining communicates internal weakness more than it communicates clarity. People who feel uncertain about themselves often provide unnecessary context or justification, hoping to gain approval or avoid criticism. This pattern is immediately perceptible to others, even if it's subtle. Women are attracted to internal stability, to the sense that a man's decisions are grounded in clarity and self-mastery. Explaining yourself too much signals that your internal state is reactive to external validation, rather than anchored in your own authority. For example, a man might apologize repeatedly for a minor scheduling conflict, or feel compelled to justify his actions in detail to prevent disapproval. So the intent here is to maintain connection or maybe demonstrate consideration, but, the effect is actually the opposite. It ends up communicating dependency, which can really undermine both attraction and respect. In contrast, a man who states his intentions concisely and confidently is actually showing internal control, signaling that his value is self-contained and not, contingent on anyone else's approval. True confidence and attraction, they're both rooted in decisiveness. A man who makes choices calmly, communicates them clearly, and stands by them without excessive explanation is really signaling competence and self-assurance. Explaining decisions at length often masks uncertainty, whereas, brevity actually communicates authority. In social or dating situations, this becomes especially clear. A man who expresses a preference for where to meet, what to do, or how to spend his time, and then just acts on it without over-explaining, he naturally commands respect. His decisions are seen as thoughtful because they are measured, not because he insists on justifying them. Women, like all humans, are unconsciously attuned to signs of internal control and composure, and those signals outweigh any verbal attempts to explain intentions. Over-explaining is often a response to emotional tension, nervousness, anticipation of judgment, or anxiety about the other person's perception. Emotional regulation, by contrast, allows you to speak with clarity and restraint. When you can observe your own emotions, pause, and respond deliberately, you communicate composure and internal strength. For instance, during a disagreement or misunderstanding, a man might feel compelled to explain every nuance of his perspective to avoid conflict or criticism. The more he explains, the more he signals emotional dependence on approval. A man who responds calmly, states his perspective succinctly, and does not feel the need to over-justify maintains authority. His restraint conveys confidence, and that presence is far more persuasive and attractive than a detailed defense of his actions. Every time you feel the need to explain yourself, you are implicitly questioning your own boundaries. Respect is rooted in consistency. People respect those who act from clear principles without needing to negotiate their self-worth in real time. Women in particular notice when a man's self-esteem is externalized through his words. Constantly explaining yourself communicates that your value is negotiable rather than intrinsic. A practical example is in dating. If a woman questions a choice you've made, such as declining a request or setting a boundary, over-explaining your reasoning dilutes the authority of that boundary. Stating your decision concisely, without elaborate justification, reinforces self-respect and communicates that your standards are stable and non-negotiable. Boundaries, upheld through internal authority rather than verbal negotiation, create respect and sustain attraction. Many men assume that talking more will enhance connection. They believe that the more they clarify, justify, or detail their actions, the more attractive they will appear. In reality, attraction is driven by presence, the ability to exist fully in the moment, communicate with intent, and maintain internal equilibrium. Over-explaining replaces presence with noise, reducing your perceived confidence and composure. In practice, this could look like a man who succinctly communicates his intentions for the evening without walking through every reason or detail behind his plans. By exercising restraint, he communicates decisiveness and self-mastery. Women are naturally drawn to presence. They feel the magnetic stability of a man who is grounded in himself, rather than dependent on external approval or constant verbal reassurance. Explaining yourself repeatedly can mask inconsistency or indecision. The most attractive men demonstrate clarity and composure through consistent action, rather than continual verbal justification. Consistency signals internal authority. Your behavior is predictable because it is governed by principles, not external validation. For example, in the workplace, a man who consistently delivers on promises and acts decisively gains influence without needing to explain himself repeatedly. Similarly, in social or dating interactions, a man who demonstrates reliability and composure through actions communicates competence and confidence far more effectively than words alone. Consistency creates trust, respect, and attraction because it signals that your internal state is stable and self-contained. Many men assume that influence requires constant verbal input. They believe that by explaining themselves thoroughly, they can persuade or guide others. In reality, influence arises from the perception of internal control. A man who speaks with calm authority, listens attentively, and responds deliberately communicates competence without needing to justify every action. So here's a practical example. In a leadership context, someone who pauses, observes, and contributes concise, well-considered input will, naturally guide discussions a lot more effectively than someone who just dominates with explanations. In dating and social interactions, the same principle applies. Measured communication grounded in internal authority actually creates attraction and influence, quite organically. One of the most overlooked psychological dynamics is that the need to explain oneself often indicates emotional dependence. The more a man feels compelled to justify his choices, the more he communicates that his value is really contingent on approval. Attraction, honestly, thrives on autonomy. People are drawn to those whose self-worth is self-contained, whose attention and engagement are choices, not obligations. A man who states his intentions succinctly, acts decisively, and refrains from over-explanation communicates that his engagement is deliberate and grounded in internal authority. This subtle but powerful dynamic enhances both respect and desire. Excessive justification, by contrast, communicates reactivity and, undermines perceived strength. The principles here are not tactics. They are habits of internal mastery. Practice speaking with intention, observing more than you contribute, and pausing before responding. Notice where your words are reactive versus deliberate. Apply these practices in work, social, and dating interactions. Over time, these habits compound into presence, authority, and, honestly, attraction. Being articulate, kind, and thoughtful is definitely valuable, but it really has to be anchored in composure and decisiveness. Let your words, be an extension of your internal stability. Speaking less, when done intentionally, actually communicates far more about your competence, reliability, and authority than any amount of over-explanation ever could. Explaining yourself constantly does not, in fact, build attraction. It signals uncertainty, emotional dependence, and honestly, a lack of internal authority. So, desire, respect, and influence really come from composure, decisiveness, emotional regulation, and clarity. Cultivate internal authority, communicate with restraint, and let your actions reinforce your words. When your presence, behavior, and speech are aligned with self-mastery, attraction and influence follow naturally. If you found this video valuable, subscribe to the channel and share it with others who appreciate psychology-based insights into confidence, influence, and personal authority. Mastery begins internally, but its effects extend into every social interaction, every relationship, and every professional encounter. The ability to speak with authority without over-explaining is one of the most effective tools you can develop for long-term attraction and respect.